My name is Paul Patton, and I'm going to talk about the scientonomic ontology. This ontology has been constructed by a number of members of the scientonomic community over the last 7 or 8 years. This talk will have 3 parts. The first part will tell us about why we need a shared ontology of entities and relations relevant to the process of scientific change. And there are 2 parts to the ontology that I'm going to talk about. The first is the epistemic domain, which will be the subject of part 2 of my talk, which consists of epistemic elements and epistemic stances. I'll be telling you what those things are in a short bit. Part 3 is the sociotechnical domain. This is the domain of epistemic agents and epistemic tools. So why do we need a shared ontology of scientific change? Okay, so let's look at some examples from other fields in the natural sciences. In many scientific fields, data are not only presented as narratives, but can also be stored in complex databases. Now, the goal of this is to, as Jamie was talking about, as the goal of Scientonomy, the idea of finding broad patterns, which are evident only when we compare large bodies of data. Okay, here's an example. This is the Tree of Life project, which takes the huge body of narrative scientific papers in the field of biology and integrates them into a database of species and of items relevant to evolutionary biology. Here's another example. This is the NASA IPAC Extragalactic Database. This takes and integrates from scientific papers a huge body of data in the field of cosmology. How is it possible to integrate all these disparate scientific papers into a single database? The answer is that these fields have a shared ontology. Biologists all know what they're talking about when they talk about biological species and taxonomic species and populations and traits and genes. There's a standard set of categories that they all understand and all use, and this allows the narratives to have something in common so that the data can be integrated into a database. The same is true for, in the case of astronomy, in this case, specifically cosmology. Now let's look at this in a bit more detail. Before we start gathering data on something like the features of galaxies, we need to decide which features of galaxies we're going to focus on, and that's the standard ontology. Now, in this case, the features of interest are sometimes picked out by Big Bang cosmology in part, and we can think of some of those things. Those are the mass of a galaxy, its size, either its angular size in the sky or its real size in space, its right ascension and declination, which is the location in the sky as seen from Earth, the redshift, which is the rate of recession of the galaxy as part of the expansion of the universe, the distance to the galaxy, and many other features. Okay, so these are the standard items that we pick out about galaxies to put into a standard database. Okay, the features are dictated by an accepted ontology of astronomical objects and their properties. Again, the theoretical basis for that ontology is the Big Bang theory. Let's consider the situation in history and philosophy of science. Now, in history and philosophy of science, the end product of research studies is typically a published narrative, as in biology, as in cosmology, but there's a problem. And that's that even when HPSers focus on historical stances of epistemic agents toward their theories and methods and questions, this data is not collected in any easily accessible database, okay? Instead, it is in a large body of personal databases and stays in textual form in articles and in personal archives that may be useful to that person, but not to the field as a whole. So why is this? Historical study can't progress without some ontology of epistemic entities and relations. But the problem is, the reason why there hasn't been or can't be a database of intellectual history is that we lack an accepted unified ontology. Each paper uses its own homemade ontology, and these are usually ill-defined and often incommensurable with one another. Here's an example. This is from a paper about the status of Newtonian theory in the 18th century. And let's look at some of the stances mentioned toward Newton's work. Okay, first it says Newton's work commanded the greatest scientific authority. It says that Newton largely reigned supreme in other areas of science. His shadow fell more lightly in areas based on experiment. Experimental sciences proceeded without any firm commitment to Newtonian concepts. The equivocal attitude of Leonard Euler toward Newton's theory of light, and the rejection of the particle theory of light, the debt to elements of Newtonian mechanics, the hegemony in the second half of the 18th century. What we see is an enormous, complicated set of verbiage devoted to different stances towards Newton's work. Now, are these really all different stances, in which case it might be hopeless to fit them all into an ontology? We consider that everybody else is probably using different language, okay? That this paper uses one language, other papers are using a different language, okay? And so are these all different stances? Or are they different names for the same stance? All this has to be clarified if we're ever going to find a shared common ontology. Now, imagine if physics was this way. That the terms like mass and weight and heaviness, amount and quantity, we would find used in different ways in every paper without anyone ever bothering to have standard, commonly shared definitions. So this is what we need in order for history and philosophy of science to create knowledge of general principles in the process of scientific change. Here's another example that this has to do with epistemic elements rather than stances. The theory of solar energy, the nebular hypothesis, the meteoritic hypothesis, the contraction hypothesis, the thermodynamic model. Now, in the case of models and hypotheses and theories, we have sort of a better idea of what those things mean, but there's still no rigorous definition to be sure that people are using these terms always in the same way. A proper ontology of epistemic entities and relations would help us avoid conflation and confusion and find a common language to talk about these phenomena. Here's the current situation. We have in the natural sciences, we have standard accepted ontologies that all members of the field use, and that enables the creation of databases and the search for general principles. We have nothing of that sort currently in history and philosophy of science. So the problem is that there's an increasing vagueness of narratives. What Scientonomy hopes to do is to change this by creating first a shared ontology for the entities involved in scientific change, and then, given that shared ontology, to create a database of intellectual history, which will aid in the search for broad general principles in intellectual history. Jamie mentioned the problems of case studies. That we look at only a limited number of examples. This powerful new tool of a database of intellectual history will allow us to test theories of scientific change against a large body of examples instead of a small cherry-picked body of examples. Now, such a database, in order to create it, again, will take a shared ontology of epistemic entities and epistemic relations. A major goal of Scientonomy is to formulate and justify a standard ontology, making it possible to extract data from historical narratives. So what about the Scientonomic ontology? First, an ontology is a theory concerning the entities and relations that populate a certain domain. What we mean by Scientonomic ontology is an ontology of epistemic entities and relations relevant to the process of scientific change. The current ontology has been developed over years, over about 7 or 8 years, and currently involves entities and relations in 2 different major domains. Those domains are, first of all, the epistemic domain, which involves such epistemic elements as theories and questions and methods and stances taken toward those elements. And then the second domain is what we call the sociotechnical domain, which involves the agents of scientific change and the tools and instruments they use, as well as the relationships of authority delegation and tool reliance within those communities. So we have 2 domains, and we're going to start by looking at the epistemic domain, which is the domain of epistemic elements and epistemic stances. There are 2 basic epistemic elements that we've identified, and you can look at the bottom of the page are citations to some of the authors that have contributed to these ideas and some of the publications, mostly in the Journal of Scientonomy, having to do with these elements. The elements are questions and theories. A theory is a set of propositions, and each theory is understood as an attempt to answer a question. And each theory is an attempt to answer at least one question. It can also answer many questions. Each question can have any number of attempted answers. A question can presuppose any of a number of theories. A theory can be presupposed by any number of questions. This is intended to be an extremely broad and inclusive framework. It's intended to catch a wide variety of different belief systems for any time period in any field of inquiry, rather than just present-day hard sciences. Let's take an example of how we might use this system, and the example will be drawn from medieval scholasticism. So here's a question. What is the distance between the Earth and the sphere of the fixed stars? Now, of course, for a medieval scholastic, the Earth meant the sphere of the element Earth, sitting stationary at the center of the universe, and the sphere of the fixed stars was the outermost of the celestial spheres. This presupposes a theory, and this is that the Earth, the body of the element Earth at the center of the universe, exists, and second is that the sphere of the fixed stars exists. And these theories, again, are answers to questions. Does the Earth exist? And does the sphere of the fixed stars exist? Okay. Now, notice then that the theories and questions form a structure, hierarchy, and we'll talk a bit more in a later talk about the significance of that for identifying scientific disciplines within scientific ontology. So we have theories and questions as our elements. Now let's talk about stances towards those elements. And among the epistemic stances that we've identified as part of the scientific ontology are the stances of acceptance, use, and pursuit. First theory, acceptance. A theory is said to be accepted if it's taken as the best available answer to its question. Use. A theory is said to be used if it's taken as an adequate tool for practical application. Pursuit. A theory is said to be pursued if it's considered worthy of further development. It's possible to accept one theory, to use a different theory in practice, and pursue some other theory. Now, this might seem kind of abstract, so what I'd like to do is take some specific examples. Here are accepted, used, and pursued theories, and on the bottom is a timeline, and we'll first talk about modern-day science. So some of the accepted theories of modern-day science include general relativity, which is taken as the best available description of gravitational phenomena. Quantum physics, which is taken as the best available description of the interaction of energy and matter. And now those theories are also used for various applications. General relativity is used, for example, in the GPS system that many of us use to find this building. Quantum physics is used in a wide variety of technologies to describe the properties of semiconductors, for example, of the cell phone that you might have in your pocket. The vast majority of cases, though, we still use classical physics. Classical physics is used to build satellites, or to launch satellites, to build bridges. And it's used also in certain scientific disciplines like the earth sciences and planetary sciences and meteorology as the best available description of those phenomena which don't involve the extreme conditions where we need to use general relativity. We no longer believe that classical physics provides the best description of reality, but it's still considered a very useful theory. Although general relativity and quantum physics are the accepted theories of their domains, we know that they are not entirely logically compatible with one another, and that motivates a search for a unified theory. And one contender for that is superstring theory. Superstring theory is not accepted as the best available description of anything, and it's not used, but it's considered pursuit-worthy by the physics community, and they continue to pursue it in the hopes that it will eventually become an accepted theory. Now let's look at the past and how we can describe the stances toward theories in past communities. Let's consider, for example, the physics community in 1800. I should first say that it's possible for an epistemic agent to accept, use, and pursue the same theory. And this was the situation in 1800 for the physics community. And the accepted theory were the theories of classical physics at that time, the theories that were used in practical applications and applications throughout physics and engineering was also Newtonian physics. And the further development of classical physics continued to be pursued. There was, for example, a research program to find the movement of the Earth through the luminiferous ether. So now let's look at 1600. Okay, the accepted theories of those time, that the best available description of the natural world was taken to be the Aristotelian medieval natural philosophy with its four elements and their properties: hot, cold, wet, and dry, and the concentric spheres of fire, water, earth, and air. The Aristotelian medieval cosmology with central earth and the celestial spheres surrounding it out to the most distant sphere of the fixed stars. Those theories were accepted. The Ptolemaic astronomy was considered a useful calculating tool for determining the positions of the planets, not as the best description of the world, but as a useful tool for figuring the positions of the planets. Copernican astronomy was also used in that context as a way of calculating where the planets were. Now, there are also some pursued ideas. We all know that people like Copernicus and Kepler and Galileo pursued the idea that Copernican astronomy ought to be accepted as the best available description of the world, that the sun really was the center of the solar system. Then there was also a pursued interest in Tychonic astronomy, which said the Earth is the center of the universe, but all the planets and celestial objects circled the sun rather than the Earth. So now you have some idea of how we might use those stances to understand periods in the history of science. And now we've talked about theories, let's talk a bit about stances toward questions. So an epistemic agent can also accept a question as a legitimate topic of inquiry, or they might reject a question. An accepted question is, for example, is the question, does extraterrestrial life exist? And there are projects like the NASA's Mars exploration project, which intend to answer that question. And there are other questions that are rejected, like what is the basis for psychic phenomena? We don't generally accept that as a pursuit-worthy question in mainstream science. Some examples from the history of question acceptance. Here, 1550, this is the era of medieval scholasticism and the Aristotelian medieval cosmology. And in that time and place, the question of what is the distance between the center of the universe, which is the Earth, and the sphere of the stars was an accepted question in the mid-16th century. In 1750, this is a symbol of phlogiston, and the phlogiston theory of combustion was accepted. And in the mid-18th century, scientists accepted many questions about the properties of phlogiston, how to characterize it. And finally, in the modern era, the synthetic theory of evolution is accepted, and we accept many questions concerning the evolution of species. Besides question acceptance, there is a concept of question pursuit. In other words, the process of formulating a question well enough that it can be the object of research. So this is still an idea under development. Let's consider theories. Remember I said that in general, theories were sets of propositions. Scientonomic ontology has come up with a number of different kinds of theories. First, there are definitions. We can think of things like, say, the definition of proton. Something that was controversial a few years back was the definition of planet, and the new definition accepted by astronomers, which excluded Pluto from the concept of planet and created the newly defined category of dwarf planet. Then there are descriptive theories. Most of the theories I've mentioned so far, general relativity theory, special relativity theory, quantum physics, Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection are all examples of descriptive theories. And finally, there are normative theories. Normative theories tell you what you ought to do. Like, for example, you ought not to fake your data. And there's one specific sort of normative theory, which is of particular importance in understanding the historical development of science, are methods of theory assessment, where we decide where individuals or communities use to decide whether or not a theory is worthy of acceptance. Now, when we're talking about norms, we can talk about not only the acceptance of a norm, but also the employment of norm. For example, you might accept the norm that one ought not to fake one's evidence in science, but may, if you're dishonest, may not employ that norm. So let's look at how we think of the change in methods through history. So like any normative theory, a method can be employed or unemployed by different epistemic agents at different times. Here is the 16th century, the era of medieval scholasticism, and there the accepted method of assessing theories was whether it seemed intuitively plausible for someone with experience in the relevant domain. So the idea that the Earth is hurtling through space at thousands of miles per hour might not seem intuitively plausible under that method. And so we might reject it as contrary to our intuition. Nowadays, theories are expected to be predictively accurate, among many other things. An example of that is Einstein's theory of general relativity predicted the bending of starlight by a strong gravitational field, like the gravitational field of the sun. That was tested by observations of the sun during an eclipse, which measured the bending of starlight, and it turned out the results exactly matched Einstein's predictions, and that led to the acceptance of relativity theory. Okay, so predictive accuracy is an important modern method. The employment of norm is not to be confused with its acceptance. A norm is said to be employed if its requirements constitute the actual expectations of an epistemic agent, and a norm is said to be accepted if it's taken as the best available answer to its question. Those are two different things. I can accept that I ought not to fake my data. I might not believe that faking my data is a good way to generate new knowledge. Okay, but I might not, if I'm dishonest, I might not necessarily employ that norm. Okay, this is what epistemic agents think they should be doing. This is what epistemic agents actually do. Now, this is a well-known phenomenon in many domains of human endeavor, that we do not always act the way we believe we ought to be acting. Okay, we might, again, we might think it's a bad thing to fake our data, but we might still try to get away with it. So then here is the summary of the various sorts of theories, including normative theories. Let's consider how this all works together. We can call a scientific mosaic a set of epistemic elements that are accepted or employed by some epistemic agent. Okay, so that's any particular community has a particular set of things that they accept. Okay, so let's take an example. This is from the contemporary scientific mosaic. Here's a fragment of it. And now here's, we've already mentioned general relativity as the best, accepted as the best available description of gravitational phenomena. Quantum physics, the best available description of the interaction of energy and matter. Cosmology and astronomy, various theories like the Big Bang theory. Chemistry, genetics, biology. Now notice that I'm giving the names of disciplines. That's a sort of a shorthand for a set of theories and questions. And in a later talk in this workshop, we're going to be talking more about the relationship between disciplines and questions and theories. Neurophysiology, psychology, sociology, economics, history, mathematics. And here is a method, the hypothetical deductive method of normative theory. Okay, so that's an example of what we mean by a scientific mosaic. The mosaic metaphor is a useful first approximation. If we zoom in, we are dealing with accepted theories and questions and employed methods. Consider a typical scientonomic diagram. Now we're going to have an example of how this stuff is useful. We're going to diagram two mosaics. One is a mosaic accepted by proponents of the phlogiston theory of combustion, and the other is the mosaic accepted by the proponents of the oxygen theory of combustion. Okay, and first they both accept certain theories. One is that metals are more alike than their ores, and that raises the question: why are metals more alike than their ores? Okay, and phlogiston theorists have an answer to that question. A theory that answers that question. Metals are more alike than their ores because all metals contain phlogiston, and that produces common properties. Now, there's another question that both of them accept as relevant. Does phlogiston exist? The answer, of course, of phlogiston theorists to this is that the substance of phlogiston does exist, and the answer that oxygen theorists would give is that phlogiston does not exist. Now, notice that this theory, phlogiston does not exist, is incompatible with the idea of using phlogiston to explain the difference between metals and their ores. Okay, so that this theory has no direct replacement in the oxygen mosaic because of this incompatibility, which is diagrammed here. Okay, so this then shows how we can use the ontology. We can use it to represent, we can use it as a basis for a diagrammatic language. Now let's look at the third part of the part three, which is the second part of our ontology, the sociotechnical domain, which is the domain of epistemic tools and epistemic agents. So first of all, what's an epistemic agent? An epistemic agent is defined as an agent capable of taking epistemic stances toward epistemic elements. We should say in more general terms what an agent is. An agent is an entity capable of pursuing goals or having purposes. Okay. Now, what we mean by an epistemic agent specifically is a system that can pursue goals in relation to in the epistemic domain. Okay. To satisfy the conditions of epistemic agency, the taking of epistemic stances must be intentional. That is, it must be purposeful. It must be in the pursuit of a goal. And the agent must have, in order for that to be the case, the agent must have a semantic understanding of the epistemic elements in question and of its alternatives. The agent must choose among them with reason and for the motive of acquiring knowledge. Okay. Now, what kinds of things can be epistemic agents? Well, first of all, it should be obvious that an individual human being has the cognitive abilities that I've just listed. So we can say that human individuals can be epistemic agents. Second, can there be communities of scientists that serve as epistemic agents? We can talk about individual scientists as epistemic agents. Now, when we're talking about communal groups as epistemic agents, it must be the case that that communal group has some form of decision-making that enables the decision to belong to the group rather than simply being the aggregate of the individuals. Now, one example of how this can be the case is we know that in epistemic communities, it's often the case that different individual agents have different areas of expertise, and they all sort of work together, like the various different parts of a radio work together to make the radio work. This is what William Wimsatt would call a composed system, okay? And a composed system has emergent properties. And so we think that the stances taken by a communal epistemic agent are emergent properties with respect, or an emergent property with respect to the individuals that make it up. Now, another question, which is increasingly pressing in given recent developments, is can an AI be an epistemic agent? Well, if you look at the cognitive abilities that I just mentioned, that the ability to pursue a goal, the idea to having semantic understanding of epistemic elements and of being able to choose among them with reason, I think it's not the case yet that AIs can do this, but perhaps soon. So I've already mentioned that different epistemic agents can have different domains of expertise. And in order for agents with different areas of expertise to work together cooperatively, there must be a link between them. And in Scientonomy, we take that link to be authority delegation. Epistemic agent A is said to be delegating authority over topic X to epistemic agent B if and only if agent A accepts that agent B is an expert on question Q, and agent A will accept an answer to Q if agent B says so. This is a very useful way of understanding the relationships among epistemic agents. Okay, here's an example. This is from the world of art and art evaluation. Now, let's consider first the art market, the people whose job it is to buy and sell paintings by great artists. Now, one of the questions I have, one of the epistemic questions I have, is the question, how do we know the provenance of a work of art? For example, is X a Monet? Okay. And in that case, for that particular question, we know the art market community delegates to a particular communal agent, which is the Wildenstein Institute. So they have a method. Since they don't have their own wherewithal for assessing theories, they're people who sell art, not people who are experts on how to recognize art. They take the answer to the question, is X a Monet, to be acceptable if and only if it's provided by the Wildenstein Institute. So this is an example of unconditional authority delegation. The art market customarily delegates authority over questions of authenticity of Monet paintings to the Wildenstein Institute. Okay, now the Wildenstein Institute is part of a broader community of art experts, okay? And they delegate authority to those art experts, but only conditionally. They accept that X is a Monet only if it satisfies the Institute's own additional connoisseurship criteria. So the art experts might say something is a Monet, but if it doesn't fit the Wildenstein Institute's additional requirements, they won't accept it. This is an example of conditional authority delegation. there are suggested modifications in place to expand the ontology of the sociotechnical domain beyond just the agents to talk about the use of tools in science. We know that tools and instruments, from a simple thermometer or a ruler to the Hubble Space Telescope and the Large Hadron Collider, are essential parts of the modern scientific enterprise. And so how is it that they fit into our ontology? Well, the suggested method, the suggested way of fitting them in has to do with the role that epistemic tools might play in the method of an agent. So we define an epistemic tool as a physical object or system as an epistemic tool for an epistemic agent if and only if there's a procedure by which the tool can provide an acceptable source of knowledge for answering some question under the employed method of that agent. Now, then the question is, what is the relationship between an epistemic agent and epistemic tool? We define, using the same concepts, the idea of tool reliance. An epistemic agent is said to rely on an epistemic tool if and only if there's a procedure through which the tool can provide an acceptable source of knowledge to some question under the employed method of that agent. Now, with these notions in hand, we can give some examples, give another example of epistemic agents and their tools. This is one example. The H0 Key project was a team of astronomers back in the 1990s whose job it was to use the Hubble Space Telescope to determine the Hubble constant, the relationship between the distance of a galaxy and its rate of recession as part of the expansion of the universe. And determining the Hubble constant is essential for determining things like the age of the universe and its structure. Okay, and the Hubble Space Telescope was uniquely suited to this job because you need to be able to measure the exact brightness of stars in distant galaxies in order to do this. And the Hubble Space Telescope was uniquely suited for photometry, the measurement of the brightness of light, because it's sitting above the Earth's atmosphere, where the atmosphere doesn't interfere with the measurements. And we use this symbol, the little circle with the cup, to symbolize tool reliance. We use the compass there to symbolize a tool. Okay. Now, you can do a broader analysis of the network of agents and tools that were involved in the Hubble Space Telescope project. There off to the side here is the H0 Key project, this team of astronomers. They worked through the Space Telescope Science Institute at the University of Pittsburgh. And they used a variety of tools like computers and the Hubble Space Telescope. They also worked with STOCC, the Space Telescope Operations Control Center. This is at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. And this is where the mission control for the Hubble telescope is. Okay, and they use then a series of, they use obviously computers, use this thing called VEST, which is a simulator of the entire Hubble Space Telescope, which they use to troubleshoot. They use communication satellites to communicate with Hubble, and they rely on another team of engineers that operate this global communication satellite system. Okay, so this is an example of how one might use the ontology of the sociotechnical domain to analyze a particular set of agents. Finally, general takeaways. It is possible, what we've shown is it's possible to formulate a broadly useful ontology of epistemic entities and their relations. The scientonomic ontology includes entities and relations in two domains, the epistemic and sociotechnical domains. The epistemic domain involves epistemic elements, theories, and questions, and epistemic stances an agent might take towards them. And it enables not just the creation of database, but also a useful diagrammatic notation for the analysis of specific mosaics. The sociotechnical domain involves epistemic agents and relations of authority delegation, and potentially epistemic tools and relations of tool reliance that also enables the analysis of particular systems in a manner that enables, in turn, the creation of a database. Okay, thank you.